How do you price your work? I cannot tell you how many times I've been asked this question over the last 6, 7 years, because people make art and they join our community, and most of the time people aren't ready to sell, or they don't want to sell, and then they get asked, oh, how much is your work? And they panic and they come to us and go, I don't know how to do this. That's what I wanted to talk about in today's episode, because pricing can trip people up, and it can actually stop people from pushing their art out into the world and selling it, because they just don't know the next steps to take. And the other thing, I want to share top tips around selling in this session. You might have already started to price your work, but I'll share some tips with you that I've learned over the last 6 years. The biggest thing I've learned is an artwork is worth what someone is willing to pay. This is why you'll see so many differences when you go looking at artwork. Some artwork is $50, some is $50,000. And in your eyes, that $50,000 is not worth it. I would rather spend the money on this one. So why is that one 50,000? And it kind of throws you into this turmoil of misunderstanding the whole concept of pricing, and because it doesn't make any sense. And so an artwork is worth what someone is willing to pay. When we sell, we're hitting that sweet spot of, we've got something, somebody else wants that something, and they're willing to pay for it. And so this is the exciting part of selling something, when you can create that transaction and pass something on, and someone's willing to pay for that. It's an amazing feeling. It isn't for everyone. For some people, it doesn't feel great because they don't like parting with their artwork. But on the whole, it is a great feeling. When it comes to pricing, if people come to me and they say, how do I price my work? I'm thinking of selling this for, is that right? The thing with asking, how do I price my work? It's like the travel analogy that I use such a lot. It's like saying, I want to go traveling. How do I travel? And first of all, you have to ask, well, where do you want to go traveling to? So asking, how do I price, is like asking, how do I go traveling? There are so many factors that affect pricing. And so we have to start defining that a little bit more before you can start to price anything. You need to drill into those factors and start to understand the variables that will affect pricing. Now, there's way too much to cover in this episode. I'm just going to touch on the basics. We've got a whole course inside our membership which talks about pricing. But I want to just go over the basics in this and give you my top tips of what I've learned over the last 6 years of pricing and working with thousands and thousands of artists from around the world as well. So rather than pricing in isolation, the first thing to do is step out and have a look at what's going on around you. It's so eye-opening when you go to galleries and art fairs and see what other people are selling their work for. And the reason for this is sometimes we sit in isolation or view the world through a lens that isn't the full reality of what's going on outside of that. For example, you might see people struggling paying for artwork that's $20, $50, but people won't pay any more than $100. You might be going to art markets and seeing this world, and it starts to make you feel like all art should be priced that way, and that who else is ever going to pay for artwork that's more? It's just never going to happen. So when you start to actually go out there and look and see what's going on, you realize that there are so many different price points and so many different artworks. Some people have this perception that oils are the only one that can sell for a higher price point. It just isn't true. So getting out there and having a look is a useful exercise, and especially then in relation to your own artwork. What other artists are making similar kinds of work to you? Having a look around in terms of that as well is really, really helpful. It starts to give you a benchmark and opens your eyes to the possibilities. If you opened a cafe, the first thing you'd probably do is go around and look to see what other cafes are operating in that area. What are they selling? How much are they selling for? So you're doing that research so that you've got a bit of a baseline to work from. So that's the first step, is doing that groundwork and doing a bit of digging. Then you have to look at yourself and look at the foundations. What does your work cost you to make? This is such a good exercise to know and to do. How much does it cost? What do you spend on materials? How long does it take you to make a piece of artwork? This gives you information to know how much you need to be covering when you're selling your artwork. So really getting to grips with how long it takes. You don't have to know exact, like precise hour by hour, but knowing roughly, you can add up material costs, divide them by a certain amount, just so you've got a rough figure for how much it cost you to make that piece. Add up your time. This can put people off sometimes if they spend like 3 months on one artwork and they think, how could I ever make the money back on that? Because I've spent, hours and hours and hours on this piece. I'd have to sell it for like 100,000 to make any money back. Well, in the early days, there are ways that you can get around that. You can make prints of that piece so that you sell the original for a certain price and it keeps making money because you've got prints of that. There are so many ways, so don't close yourself off. There are ways that you can actually price that at a high price and figure out how to get there. So for now, working out what it costs, and then you can start to play around with other things that you're selling, or ways to bring that money back of the time that you're spending to make that laborious piece over 3 months. There might be preliminary sketches that you can sell for a high amount that only take you seconds. Might not just be the 3 month piece that you sell, it might be all the play work. People overlook that and think, well, they're not finished pieces, but people will buy them. So having a look at what you create, how long it takes, and getting a feel for that is the next step. You need to know that, how long it takes and how much it costs. If you're a beginner, this is what I advise to do, and this is not what you should do long term. It's not a good strategy long term, but figuring out what something cost you, what would you like to get back for that piece of artwork, keeping it fairly realistic, in terms of what it cost you, add some time on for making it, and cost it at a price that feels good for you to be reimbursed for that piece. And I say this in the beginning because usually people's confidence is low, and it's great to get that sale and that social proof and start selling. And then from there, you can build up and build up and put your prices up and create demand. So if you're a beginner and someone's reached out to you, work out what it costs and come up with a number that feels right for you to be reimbursed for what you created. Then go back and speak to the person and see whether that fits with them. And knowing that that's not the number that's fixed forever, you can increase that number. But I think it's much better to just get going and get selling and get on that wagon, because then you get the desire and you go, right, now I want to sell more and I'm going to put my prices up. So it's much easier to go lower and build the demand for your work and that excitement and keep putting your prices up than it is to go really, really high and really struggle to sell and then have to slash things because you need to make money. That's just my opinion anyway on pricing. So the more demand you have for your work, the higher the price. That is how it works. The more demand you have for anything, the price goes up. So as a beginner, if you start out by selling at that price, you're just adding up your cost, you're adding a bit on that you're comfortable with, and you're selling. That will work for a short amount of time, but then you want to be putting your prices up. You want that scale to be going upwards. And that's when you start to create more demand. And you create more demand in many ways by creating value, by creating the desire for what you have, by helping people connect with your artwork, building relationships with people, finding the purpose of your work, showing that. That could be showing it on the wall. It could be showing, there's so many ways to show how your artwork can benefit someone. And you're talking about that and why you made it and emphasizing the amazingness about your artwork, which can be intimidating for people. And that's why we have lots of resources to help you. But that's how you create more demand. When you sell, it creates more demand. People buy things that are selling. It's really true. Those red dots really help people think, oh, right, this must be selling. This must be good. I'm going to buy one too. So there's lots and lots of ways that you can create more demand for your artwork. And that's how your pricing goes up. And you want your pricing to be going up. That's what we all want, isn't it? So one thing to remember with pricing, context is everything. If you price your work for $100, $1,000, $10,000, Where you put that work matters. A $10,000 work might sell in Gallery A because they have the clients and customers that are looking for artwork at that price point. Put that same artwork in a market where the ceiling price is $100. Maybe people don't spend more than $100 at these places. It's not going to sell. So can you see how putting your artwork in the right place is also part of this puzzle? Because if you price your artwork and it's not in the right place, that matters. So finding the right place for your work also matters. Now, that might be online on your own profile, and it means finding your people. So again, doing this research in what's happening and building up that desire will help you push the price of your artwork up. But being aware of that, because sometimes I raise this because I see people putting artwork in particular places and then they start slashing prices when actually it's just not in the right place. That brings me to the next topic of, if you want to sell your artwork for $10,000 or $1,000 at the higher price point that you're not selling at right now, a great tip is to ask yourself, what do I need to have to hit that number? What other artists are selling at that price point? How did they get to that price point? Why are they able to sell at that price point? You're becoming a detective and you're asking yourself, how can I get there? What can I do to my work and my professional practice and myself as an artist to start to raise my prices? How can I create more desire? But also, when you see people selling at those price points and the people buying at those price points, it's an investment. There is a different buying habit for someone buying in the thousands than there is in the tens and the hundreds. It's a more considered purchase. They want to know more about the artist. They want to know that you're invested in this, that you're going somewhere, because it's an investment. And that's where you can start to look about, if I want to go to that scale, I need to work on my professionalism. I need to work on all the things that these artists have in place and build these relationships with people that have access to people that can sell at these price points. I might have to work on my work to, I don't know, push it forwards more to get into these places. So these are the things that you can ask yourself. Don't ever write it off. You can ask yourself, how can I get my work there? How can I get it to that price point? And push it and keep taking those steps to get it there. So consistency is key in pricing. This is one of the things I get asked a lot. Is it okay for me to price my work in my local area for $500, but when I go and put it into the big city, can I up it to $3,000? Or I have my work in a gallery and they take 50%. So can I slash 50% off the work that I sell personally? And the answer is consistency. Whatever your work is priced at, it stays at that price. Whether it's in the gallery or whether you sell it, it's the same price. Whether it's up here or down there in a different city, it's the same price. And the big reason for this is trust and rapport, but also your work is, that's the value, that's the price. It doesn't change and fluctuate depending on where it is. It is the price of your work. And that builds rapport and trust in people as well. If I was in London and then I happened to see your work down there, and this is a big city in the UK, of course, and then I go to a little rural village and I see the same artwork, but it's £2,000 less, I'm not going to trust you. And I'm going to be like, why is this? And it doesn't make any sense to a buyer to pay something because they happen to be in this area at the time. So you have to see from a buyer's point of view that just, how would you feel if you'd paid something so much more because you happen to be in a different area and then you saw it somewhere else? You wouldn't like it. So that's why it's just not ethical, and it's just not done. And especially with a gallery, you don't want to underprice your gallery. So if someone goes to the gallery and they come to you, they get the same price. You don't want to confuse your customers by slashing prices and having something half the price, which is such a big jump in price. So everything stays consistent. Now, one other tip I have is, when it comes to pricing, having 3 tiers. So it doesn't have to be 3, but I like to work in kind of 3 tiers, where I have something which is a high end, cost, which is the highest thing that I sell. And I have something that is mid and low. So the entry price point is the cheapest item that people can purchase or service. And then the high is, this is the highest option that I have. This is my like exclusive or big piece, or, and then in the middle of those two is your mid price point. And the reason this is really helpful to have, especially when you're first starting out as well, is that if someone comes into your world and they can't afford the big, expensive piece, you don't just lose the sale, you have options. You can then offer an alternative piece at a mid price point, or you can also, there are ways as well, if they can't afford that high price point, is to adjust something, make it a little bit smaller, make a bespoke piece. So you've got options. And then there's also the price perception as well, because if people can't afford your most expensive, they then see the mid and entry as better value, because it is better value. They can get a piece of you without having to pay this massive price point. And also, once people buy from you, they are, it's said, 70% likely to buy from you again. So once someone's bought from you, they might end up becoming that customer that buys the high price point artwork. It takes time for people to trust and build rapport, and they might end up becoming the customer that buys the $10,000 piece. So equally, the flip side also happens, where people come in and they want to buy the most expensive, because for some people, buying a less priced item is a bargain, and people buy in that way, they're price driven. Other people see the more expensive option as where the quality is, and I don't want a cheaper one, I want the best one, and I want the highest priced one. So the reverse works as well. So you have something to start to compare and contrast with when you've got different price points, instead of just selling one thing that's the one price. If you're just starting out, just get one thing, one price. But this is something to think about as you grow. The one last thing I want to mention is never price based on your perception of whether something is cheap or expensive, because it goes back to what I was saying in the beginning around your perception of the world. And if you're seeing people spending art that's $50, you begin to think that that is the whole world, and it isn't. And $50 might be really expensive to you, but it's just a drop in the ocean to someone else. And to actually someone else, a $50 artwork is cheap. You know, to a lot of people, it does bring up the question of how